It happened in the summer of 2006. I've had other experiences since, but none as life-changing as those in that summer. While attending college in Moscow, Idaho, I applied for and accepted a job with the Idaho DEQ. I would be working with two other young men on a beneficial use reconnaissance team out of Grangeville, Idaho. Our job was to visit the rivers and drainages along the Selway, Clearwater, and Lochsa rivers, collecting fish, water, and algae samples. We were given a truck, 2 weeks of training, maps, cooking equipment, and a handshake, then cut loose to do our job in the northern Idaho wilderness. The two young men I worked with were both from Washington State. I was the only Idaho native. One guy was a former Marine who didn't talk much. I'll call him L. The other was a very young man from Seattle, with no outdoor experience at all. I'll call him R. It was towards the end of our summer, and we had gelled into a good work routine. We worked so well that we could easily cover 3 rivers and still have time to fly fish the beautiful streams and rivers we were so blessed to be surrounded by. One night, while camping near the Idaho-Montana border, we arrived late in the day and were setting up camp when I smelled huckleberries. Following the scent to a thick patch of berries along the road behind camp, I noticed footprints in the loose dust that covered the road. R passed them off as belonging to a hippie who was out picking berries. However, this didn't make sense. There were only our tire tracks on the dead-end road, and the size of the footprints was odd. There were also more than one set of prints. L agreed they might have come from wood-dwelling hippies. He said, "Just because they're big doesn't mean there's something to wonder at." Despite L being a big guy and one set of prints being about the size of his size 13 foot, it never made any sense to me. The tracks came from the woods to the berry bushes and then back into the woods. The next evening, we broke camp and moved a few drainages west, making camp on a sandbar of the Skull Creek River. We went fly fishing for our supper and brought our catch back to camp to cook on our little Coleman camp stove, set upon a plastic bifold table in the middle of camp. After dinner, we were all beat and agreed to do the dishes in the morning. While getting ready for bed, R was in the woods brushing his teeth when he came running back to camp, yelling about something huge in the woods. I had never seen R like that. He was truly terrified. He said it was dark and huge. I passed it off as maybe a moose. R insisted it wasn't a moose. It moved like a man trying to hide. He was on the verge of hysterics, starting to yell. L came stomping out of his pup tent, pistol in hand. We weren't allowed to carry firearms as state employees on state business, but we did anyway due to the nature of our job. L walked a few paces into the woods and fired off almost his entire clip. Then he told both of us to shut the f*** up and hit the rack, which we promptly did, though R was a nervous wreck. Little did we know, things would only escalate from there. Around 1:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by a crash. I knew right away it was our mess from dinner. Thinking it was either a bear or raccoons, I put on my headlamp and stepped outside. What I saw confused me. Our camp table was still standing, but nothing was on it. I looked around and found our cookware, pans, and dishes lying yards away from the table and along the riverbank. As I crouched down to pick up our forks and plates from the water's edge, I began to wonder, what could have done this? Raccoons would have scattered things, and bears would have knocked over the table. Most troubling, both would have left evidence. With that thought, I stood up and walked back to the table, scouring the sandbar for any tracks that weren't made by my crew. I found none. I looked back at the debris scattered across the shore, and a horrible feeling overcame me. Whatever did this had placed an arm across the table and strongly swept everything off, leaving the table standing and our gear spread out in an arcing line along the river. That's when the horrible, helpless feeling struck me. I wasn't alone. And whatever had done this was watching me. I couldn't see anything in the shadows of my headlamp, but I could feel it. Growing up in the southeastern Rockies of Idaho, I was literally raised in the woods. They were and are my second home, a place to feel free and safe despite the wildlife. But that night, I realized everything I was raised to believe was wrong. The comforting illusion that I was somehow in control was shattered. I have never, to this day, been so afraid, even in the woods. All I could do was put my head down, walk back to my tent, zip it up, and hide in my sleeping bag, listening for anything other than the drone of the Skull Creek River. I was startled awake by L. He was yelling for answers. His tent had been dismantled and placed on top of him, poles and all. R began to explain that Daniel, me, had been walking around the camp all night. I got up and clarified what I had been doing. They both heard the crash but fell back asleep. R said he heard me walking around late into the night and figured I was cleaning up the mess. After I explained what I'd seen and done, L chalked it up to an animal and hurried us to pack up and get to work. That's when I discovered my cooler, which held all our food, was missing. Unable to find it, we loaded up and headed upriver. We were about 2 miles from camp when R began to feel ill and went into the trees. I waited, then heard him calling for me. A few hundred yards from the river, I found R and a large area scattered with wrappers and cans. I quickly realized this was what was left of my food. We eventually found my cooler in 2 pieces. It wasn't locked, just a large plastic cooler for shift work, yet it had been torn apart. There were no claw or teeth marks on the foam or plastic, just blunt indentations, especially on the tins of kipper snacks. No sign of canine teeth. We packed up the mess and got back to work. R was visibly scared, constantly looking around. We didn't speak of what we thought had happened. We just worked. For our final night out, we camped on a logged-out section of a mountain overlooking the entire valley. As part of our ritual, we shared a bottle of wine. That's when the howling and screaming started. It was coming from the area around Skull Creek, where we had just been. It couldn't have been more than a mile away. It sounded like nothing I've ever heard, maybe closest to a very large, deep-voiced gibbon. At first, we thought it might be some backwoods jokers, but we'd been out there for 10 and hadn't seen another soul. No signs, no vehicles on any visible roads. The sound haunted me. It still does, and I cannot explain it. It wasn't any animal I've ever known. The howls and screams continued for hours, but never came closer. We settled in and eventually fell asleep. What happened next may have been the most troubling part of the entire trip. We packed up and returned to Grangeville to meet our DEQ field supervisor, transfer our samples, and debrief. During the chat, L was reluctant to mention anything, likely due to the firearm incident. But our supervisor was unfazed. After we recounted everything, the camp incident, the destroyed cooler and food, the howls and screams, he wasn't surprised. In fact, he calmly said, "Almost every 3 years, one of my crews has a visit." He followed that with a stern warning. As long as we worked for the state, we were not to jump to conclusions or speak of any cryptids. Doing so would result in immediate termination. That was the most serious I'd ever seen him. He was normally a jovial, family-oriented, straightforward guy. But something in his tone told me this was more than a random event. It was something he had rehearsed out of necessity, born of prior experiences. That cemented it for me. This was a Sasquatch, and the state of Idaho knew it. He never commented further, and to this day, I've never been able to get more from him about what happened to other crews in the same area. That's how the 3 of us ended our summer in the woods of Idaho County. We've since graduated college, started families, and gone our separate ways. But even now, in chats on Facebook, we still talk about and speculate from the safety of our homes what followed us that week. My story happened back in July of 2001. I was at scout camp. We were high up in the mountains in eastern Utah. The scout camp is called East Fork of the Bear. This was the 2nd year I had been there. This year, I was getting my Wilderness Survival Merit Badge, so they took us one night out from the scout camp, a mile north. We had to make a shelter and look for food. I went with 5 others from the troop. 2 went off to make another camp about 50 feet from us. The rest of us found a large tree that had fallen over. We found other smaller fallen trees, took them over, and leaned them on it to make a shelter for the night. It took 6 of us to pick these trees up, plus a dad who came to help us. We put a tarp over the top and all crawled in and went to sleep. I was by the exit to the shelter as I have to get up in the middle of the night a lot to go pee. So the night starts out slow, with all of us scared. We didn't want to be there. Well, they started to tell scary stories, and I really got scared and started having to go to the bathroom more. After about 4 hours, everyone was asleep, and I finally got up to use the restroom. As I'm looking around me, I saw a huge figure staring at me. I couldn't make out a face, as it was too dark, and it was about 30 feet away. It was about twice my height, so around 9 feet tall, and was wide with long arms and legs that wouldn't go straight. It also looked like it had no neck. Well, as any brave 13-year-old would do, I got back in my sleeping bag and closed my eyes. The creature came over and found the 4 of us. One of the boys heard it coming and started to wake everyone up. He started crying. That's when it pushed our shelter over. Remember, it took 7 of us to even move those logs. It did it on its own. We all started getting out of the shelter and making a lot of noise. The scout leaders started yelling, and every adult started to run toward where we were. Just as fast as it came, it was gone. It made one crash sound as it left. Then it was quiet. I didn't see it up close. I only heard it. When the scoutmasters got to us, they thought we were pulling their legs. They told us to shut up and go back to sleep. After that, none of us went to sleep and no one wanted to talk about it. We just left early the next morning back for the main camp. On July 15th, 1994, at Bear Scout Camp in Summit County, Utah, we were walking down a trail at night. It was a full moon, or pretty big anyhow. There was a stream, and on the other side I saw a hominid. It was walking on 2 feet easily. Not a bear, not a gorilla, not a chimp, not any ape I've ever seen. I'm very, very sure of that. It was either a man or Bigfoot. I don't think it was a man. It doesn't fit very well. I only saw him a few seconds out of the dark shadows under the trees, but it was so obvious. It was just about 50 to 60 feet across the stream, walking along the bare side of an embankment where it sloped up from the stream bottom. And I didn't say anything at first. It was just so right there. I assumed the guy in front of me saw it and had taken it into account. We kind of looked to him as the leader since he was a few years older. Anyway, when he didn't say anything, I began to suspect he didn't see it. I think he was humming a song and wasn't paying much attention. I was about to speak up when the guy behind me started to say something too. He had heard a noise up ahead. He pointed to where the creature had gone. It had walked across the slope and down toward the stream in front of us. There it made a noise above the sound of the small stream. It sounded like a rock clacking against another, like when you step on a rock and it clacks into another one. He was worried about what that sound was. I was all excited and tried to tell them what I saw. We all got nervous. We yelled, but there was no answer. We were extremely scared. We were working as merit badge counselors at a scout camp. When you see another person up there, you say hi because they're all fun-loving, friendly scouts or scoutmasters. This creature passed very near us, easily in range for a howdy or hello, but it didn't answer and didn't talk. We backtracked through the meadow we were in at the time, into the lodgepole pines at the other end. We sat in the dark until about 1 a.m. We figured the creature went past at about 10. We imagined all sorts of things sneaking up on us in the dark. We finally each got big sticks, and Danny got his knife, and we went the rest of the way down the trail, ready to attack anything that moved. We were extremely scared. Let me describe the creature. It was tall, seemed about 6 to 7 feet. It was all one dark color. It walked surely, quickly, and quietly. I noticed it brushed a sapling with its hand as it walked by it. It had a high crown. It was built stoutly in the torso, hips, and thighs. I don't think a person that fat could move so smoothly like it did. It also didn't look like a fat person. It seemed proportional, like that was how it was supposed to be. The thighs were wide and went up to a curved large buttock. It just wasn't like a person. It was bigger, but seemed, the only word I could think of, firm, fit, not fat, not inhibiting. I'm a very methodical, detail-oriented type person. I've loved nature all my life and know what the different animals look like. It was not a bear or an escaped ape. It moved in a distinct way. It sort of twisted its hips so the outline of the thigh and buttocks changed. We didn't find any tracks or such the night we saw it. We were too scared to go looking. The next day, we had to do our job, which took all day. It had rained also before we had a chance to look for tracks, and we thought that any tracks would have washed away. The Wellsville Mountains are a designated wilderness area with no roads, very few trails, and an abundance of wildlife, including mule deer. They are considered to be some of the steepest and most rugged mountains in northern Utah. I was 21 and had just returned about 6 months before from living in Japan for 2 years. The general season mule deer hunt had just opened, and I decided to go hunting one day after my college classes had ended. I remember thinking how stupid it was that I had to go to class during the hunt and didn't want to. While I was driving, sliding my car up a snowy road, I turned off the paved road onto a farm road, went past a house that was under construction, and parked in the small trailhead lot. Instead of going up the mountain, I walked a short distance around a field and sat down on a steep slope overlooking a valley, a few hills, and some trees. I sat looking through my binoculars at the deer bedded down in the trees, wondering why they wouldn't get up and forage in the trees for nuts or grasses. As I sat watching, I heard a loud crashing sound coming from the trees nearer to the house and barn that was being built. It may have even been watching them, as it was very close to the house. I looked through my binoculars and could see a large black shape moving through heavy cover. At first, I thought it was a black bear, but as I watched it, it didn't have the bouncing motion that bears have when they run because their front legs are shorter than their rear legs. It was moving very gracefully. I watched as it plowed through thick brush like a bull until it made it to more open ground in the trees and noticed how strange it really was. It was moving on 2 legs and moving fast. I looked and saw all the deer running, unfortunately in the other direction, and turned back to the animal. I watched in amazement as it went straight into a massive stand of buckbrush that I couldn't have gotten through with a machete. It kept moving at a phenomenal pace and was gone over a ridge in just a few seconds. I've hunted and hiked alone for years and come toe-to-toe with both black bears and mountain lions and never, ever been that afraid before. I immediately put a bullet in my rifle and backed away from the spot, never turning my back. I got in my car and left. My dad, brother, and brother-in-law keep wanting to go back there because we've seen deer there, but I've never gone back. Even when I hunt the other end of the Wellsville Mountains, I stay with someone because of the experience. After investigator Todd Strong interviewed the witness, the following can be added. The witness was familiar with the area and had hunted and scouted there before. He has been hunting since he was 14 years old. It was a clear afternoon, and he observed the animal for 30 seconds. He could clearly see definition in the animal's biceps, triceps, and abdominals. It was very muscular, clearly athletic, and bulldozed its way uphill through 10-foot-tall oak brush with its arm covering its face for protection. The action looked like a massive football player plowing through the line. The witness doubted he could even walk through the thick scrub oak, let alone run through it. Thanks for listening. I think you might find this video of interest as well. If you've had an encounter or sighting of a Sasquatch and would like your story told here, please email me, Lynn Smith, at bigfootcasefilesmail.com. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Welcome to Bigfoot Case Files Classic, Bigfoot Encounter Reports, 1960s, Part 4. Near Clipper, Washington, mid-June 1968. Working as a logger 9 miles east of Clipper, Frank Lawrence Jr. of Marietta told John Green he saw male and female creatures and a child, all covered with black hair. He estimated the male at 6 feet, the female a little shorter with pendulous breasts, and the child about 5 feet and more lightly built. Mr. Lawrence said he was lying down eating lunch when he heard a whistle and stood up, seeing the three creatures about 100 yards off. They did not run away, but he did. North of Stevens Pass, Washington. Summer 1968. Darrell Johnson of Wenatchee wrote to Roger Patterson that two relatives of his found 18-inch tracks on a trail just north of Stevens Pass, so fresh that where they crossed some mud near a creek, water was still oozing into them. Tandem Valley, west of Yakima, November 1968. Roger Patterson recorded that two college students parking at 2 a.m. in the moonlight saw an 8 or 9 foot Sasquatch which advanced within a dozen feet of one of them after he got out of the car. Prints were seen and photographed the next day. West of Orion, Washington, December 21st, 1968. A Kettle Falls man described to John Green tracks about 14 inches long in deep new snow beside a mountain road. He thought at the time they were bear tracks and did not examine them, but they had a stride of between 3 and 4 feet. Near Skamania, March 5th, 1969. Don Cox of Washougal, going fishing at 4 a.m., saw a fur-covered human form run across the road in front of his car and up a high bank in 2 steps. Renee DeHinden and John Green found a few probable tracks in forest litter on the top of the bank. This story, reported in newspapers, started a general search in the area, which turned up at least 2 sets of tracks. Near Carson, Washington, March 9, 1969, Mr. and Mrs. John Durrell found 18-inch tracks with a 54-inch stride in the snow on their property, according to the Skamania County Pioneer. 2 weeks later, after these tracks were reported, County Sheriff Bill Klossner cast a 22-inch track there. The tracks were near the lower part of Bear Creek, about 4 miles northeast of Carson and less than 20 miles from the scene of the Cox sighting. Near Stevenson, March 1969. After seeing the track cast by the sheriff, Ed McClarney and Marvin Morash headed into the back country in McClarney's four-wheel drive rig. They went as far as the snow would permit, then took off into the mountains. 7 miles from any habitation, they discovered big footprints emerging out of a canyon, crossing a snow-covered forest trail, proceeding through a logged-over area or clear-cut, and headed toward the lava beds. There were no snowmobile tracks, no ski tracks, no snowshoe tracks, and no people tracks of any kind. They returned convinced that something out of the ordinary had certainly been there. Near Skamania, March 1969. The Pioneer Special Bigfoot Edition, summer 1969, reports that Mrs. Ellen Satterthwaite saw the legs and torso of a huge, hairy creature cross the quiet country road in front of her car at night as she was driving home. Her headlights were too low to show the head. Near Orient, spring 1969. Mrs. Betty Peterson, then living at Kettle Falls, described to John Green 2 black creatures, both over 7 feet tall and one a head taller than the other, which she saw run across the highway just south of Boulder Creek, south of Orient, about 11 a.m. They came from the direction of the river and ran upright, leaning forward a little. Their speed and size were impressive. Near Marietta, spring 1969. A sailor from a U.S. submarine wrote to Dr. Steve Pauley, a San Diego Sasquatch researcher, about a sighting late at night near a church under construction. He said he and 3 other people were sitting in a car when one of them saw motion 75 to 100 feet in front of them. They switched on the lights and illuminated a white-furred animal, 7 to 8 feet high, standing erect with its arms hanging almost to its knees. It immediately headed into the woods. Near Carson, April 1969. K.L. Kramer of Gresham, Oregon, wrote to John Green that he and 3 other men had photographed what appeared to be 20-inch tracks with a 5-foot stride, about 20 miles northeast of Carson. Near Hoquiam, July 26, 1969. Deputy Sheriff Verlin Harrington, driving home at 2:35 a.m., saw a creature on the road north of Hoquiam. He described it to John Green as erect, very tall, and covered with dark brown hair. The face was dark and leathery, there was a flat nose, no snout, and the creature had human-type breasts and long, muscular legs. He got a spotlight on it and got out of the car before it walked down the bank off the road. West of Lake Chelan, July 1969. On an alpine meadow 25 miles northwest of Ardenvohr, by an isolated lake on the North Fork of the Entiat River, Mike Wolfe and Pat Craig of Wenatchee found tracks 15 to 17 inches long and 6 inches wide, with double a human stride. Near Cub Lake, East Darrington, August 1969. Mark Mize and Marshall Cabe of Darrington told Dick Grover that they were chased back to their camp by 3 Sasquatches. The following is part of a Seattle Times story printed August 13, 1969. Mies and Kababe said they were camping near Cub Lake with 6 other teenagers on August 4th. They left the party and hiked about a mile from the campsite. Mies carried a .22 caliber rifle and Cabe had a fishing pole. Mies said that at about 8:30 p.m., while there was still daylight, they saw what they first thought was a bear or a stump, but then it raised its arm and made a motion like a human for them to come toward it. Then it began to move, and 2 others appeared from behind it. Mark said he and Marshall began to run back to the camp, and the 3 creatures, running gracefully on 2 legs, chased them. At one point we looked back, and they were 50 to 75 yards behind us, he said. I'm sure they could have caught us if they wanted to. The creatures stopped chasing them as they approached the camp. He described them as hairy, with fingers and toes, and hairless faces, more human than ape. With heads that dipped in and out, Mark said all 8 of them sat up all night around a campfire and heard shrill screams, like a woman screaming in panic, but more shrill, 3 times. They reported the incident to a Forest Service ranger. Mark said the others disbelieved them at first, but became convinced when they later heard the screams. Near North Bend, summer 1969 sign. Robert Parker of Bellevue told John Green he and several friends saw a brown creature of great size walk upright across a hillside above the creek where they were fishing, north of Mount Si. He first noticed it when it screamed. Near Stevenson, September 15, 1969. The Skamania County Pioneer, September 19, 1969, reported that 2 tracks, 15.5 inches long and 9 inches wide, were found at a logging operation on Stevenson Ridge, 5 miles north of town. They were photographed, and one was cast by Sheriff Bill Klossner. 5 Heights near Tacoma, September 30th, 1969. Dick Hancock and Gary Johnson told Dick Grover they saw a Sasquatch run across the road at night and bend a metal sign it hit with its hand. Deception Pass, September 13th, 1969. A man from Anacortes wrote to John Green that his daughter's fiancé, driving home at 2:30 a.m., saw a black-haired animal a bit over 5 feet tall walking erect across the road just north of the Deception Pass Bridge. Near North Bonneville, Mrs. Louise Baxter of Skamania told John Green that while driving 4 miles west of North Bonneville at about 10 p.m., she saw a huge, dark gray, shaggy-furred animal cross the road so close she had to swerve to miss it. The head was above her headlights, but she was greatly impressed with the huge hairy hand, leg, and foot. Southwest of Yakima, October 1969. Ross Hendrich told Roger Patterson he saw 2 Sasquatches while deer hunting. He had stopped for lunch and watched 2 dark brown creatures, 7 to 9 feet tall, walking up a hill about 150 yards away. They would reach down and grab something from under rocks as they walked. He said he had also seen tracks in the past, once indicating that the thing had carried off an elk he had shot and skinned. Near Fort Lewis, November 1st, 1969. Army Sergeant Lloyd Stringer reported to the sheriff's office that while driving at midnight in fog near St. Clair Lake between Olympia and Fort Lewis, he hit a brown-haired animal about 6 feet tall that was standing on 2 feet. Near Bossburg, November 24th, 1969. Tracks were found by the Bossburg garbage dump and at the North Gorge boat launching ramp, more than 17 inches long, with the right foot badly distorted and showing only 4 toes. Renee Dahinden and Bob Titmus both saw some of these. Near Woodland, November 23rd, 1969. The Lewis River News, November 27th, 1969, reported that Charles Kent of Woodland walked out to his car and saw in the moonlight, about 40 yards away, an animal he thought was a bear on its hind legs. When he got others out of the house, it was gone, but on the muddy hillside they found 18 tracks, neither bear nor human, 11 cord inches by 4 inches, which sank in more than twice as far as theirs did. Near Bossburg, December 14th, 1969, Renee Dahinden and Ivan Marks found more than 1,000 prints of the foot creature in snow, leading out of Lake Roosevelt and back in again. On September 26th, I had posted a video called "A Creature Has Been Bothering Us for Quite Some Time." The witness, Alejandro Ortiz, has contacted me again with more information. I began to ask my grandma more on this topic and where they came from in our native Latino Mexican culture. Me and my family went outside with my grandma near our house, and she explained everything to us. When you want to interact with the big guys, the best thing you should do is stay across from the Bigfoot, male or female, and wave your hand at them. If the Bigfoot waves back at you, then this means they accepted your request to interact with them. If they don't wave back, then they will either walk away or chase you away from their neighborhood by throwing stones. This is mainly done by them because they have children in those caves and think that you will attack them and their family members. They dislike hunters and guns. The next thing you have to do is speak out loud and say that you mean no harm and want to speak to them. You can say that out loud or in your mind. The Bigfoot will receive the message either way. They already know your name and intention by using telepathy. The shy ones will mostly stay behind a tree and observe you. When they see that you have no guns or bad intentions, they will walk towards you and speak to you by using their minds. They even save humans when they're in danger. Our ancient tribes lived with them and told us that they use their mind in order to speak to humans. They are very smart and decided to live in caves because they don't feel safe around hunters. A lot of Bigfoots have shooting wounds in them, but they recover very quickly. I asked my grandma another question, and that was, where do they come from? My grandma said they originate from elsewhere and migrated to Earth and spread to different caves on Earth by opening portals. When you see a UFO and a Bigfoot, then that means they left their home planet and came to visit Earth. May 12th, 2009, San Juan County, New Mexico. A friend was visiting from out of town, and so we decided to take advantage of the clear skies and mild temperatures and go for a road trip. We'd just been down near Window Rock, Arizona, and we're heading back to Farmington, New Mexico. The easiest way to do so is going over Narbona Pass. The speed limit on this road is 65, and I was traveling at 65 when coming around a corner just south of the picnic area. As I came around the corner, I noticed something moving rapidly in a diagonal direction up the side of the hill, just where the forest meets the meadows lining either side of the highway. It would be on the east side of the road. I slowed down and said to my friend, "Did you see that?" He said he'd seen it as well. I hit the brakes to get another look, but knew that by the time I backed up, it would have been long gone. What we saw was larger than a black bear or elk, with blackish-brown hair that could be seen hanging all over its body. It was running on 2 legs up the hill. It never looked over at us, and we only saw its side and back, broad and at least 7 feet tall. We were both under the impression that we had startled it, and it was quickly trying to get into the forest cover. We stopped a mile or 2 up the road where the road crosses the creek at an ancient lava flow. The whole time we were looking out at rocks, there was an eerie feeling that we were both getting that something was watching us. We stayed around for an hour, and when the sun started to get lower behind the mountain, we decided it was best to leave. July 1980, San Juan County, New Mexico. My family would spend the summers in the mountains and help herd sheep. We had a cabin, corrals, tents, and several other structures on the property, and occasionally would have some weird experiences with our animals. The dogs would bark at something unseen to us, and the sheep would run away from something hidden in the forest. We would just feel like something was watching us from the shadows. It was near dusk, and my family had just finished dinner and were socializing. I'd been thumbing through a book when John, who I will call to respect his privacy, came running into the shade house we built next to the cabin, crying and white as a sheet. He was always the macho type that showed no emotion. So to see him this afraid alarmed my grandmother, aunts, and uncles, who hurried out the front door. They stood at the threshold looking down in the direction of the well. I put the book down and walked to the door. They were all whispering in Navajo when I saw something down at the well. At first, I was excited because I thought it was a black bear. Then I noticed it was a grayish-brown color and was kneeling. I had never heard of a bear that could kneel like a man. It looked as if it was washing something off or taking a drink. I had no problem with it until it looked over its shoulder at us, and I could see its features. Manlike. That's all I needed to see. I ran into the cabin and hid under the covers. I was younger, and to this day, when I ask my mother about it, she says that everyone else was in agreement that it was a Bigfoot. A few weeks later, it was standing outside our tent at about 2 a.m. I saw the shadow on the tent. As for the dogs, they weren't making a sound, when typically, if anything or anyone came around, they would howl and bark. October 2003, San Juan County, New Mexico. Late in the afternoon in early fall, we were getting ready to move our livestock back down from the mountain to the winter camp. My brother and I were with our mother, and we were looking for our cattle. Mom had cooked, and we ate a late lunch, got some rest, and talked about what areas we hadn't checked yet. My brother was still eating, so my mom and I decided to check the area below our summer sheep camp. We got in my truck and started driving slowly. We had driven about a mile or two from the house down the mountainside through thick brushes and pine trees, driving slow enough to look around for any cows that were down that way. Usually there are some, but today they weren't anywhere to be found. So we kept driving, Mom talking about how the weather was changing and getting a bit chilly. I kept looking left and right, driving slowly. Then I saw a movement just behind the pine trees. At first, I thought it was a man, so I stopped and backed up just a bit and said to Mom, "Who's that?" She goes, "Where?" I said, "Right there, look," and pointed for her in that direction. That person was standing right next to a pine tree, tall and reddish brown. Then that person went behind a tree and stood there. So I backed up some more, and then it turned and started moving fast away from us into the thick brush. That's when Mom and I both noticed that this thing had long, hairy arms, because when it turned around, the arms spun around. It was reddish brown. It then ran into the forest. We were still parked there, puzzled. Mom goes, "What was that?" I said, "I don't know." Then I got scared and looked at my mom and said, "Let's go." We turned right there on the road and headed for home. We drove back fast, and believe me, this particular road requires slow driving, but not that afternoon. We got back to the house and I told my brother. He goes, "It's probably a sheep herder." I told him, "A sheep herder wouldn't have long, hairy arms." Then he tells me, "No, they wouldn't." He wanted to go back down there and look for that thing, but I was scared and the sun was about to go down behind the mountain. It would be dark soon. There's no way I'd be going down there in the dark. We packed up our stuff and left from the mountain. March 2002, San Juan County, New Mexico. Note, at their request, the witnesses' names were removed from this report. It was back a few years ago when we were still scouting put-ins and takeouts on the non-commercial sections of the San Juan River. We would drive these narrow two-track roads to find river access and then float and scout these sections accordingly. We could not find any real information, either in print or on the web, about the river from Shiprock, New Mexico, down to Montezuma Creek, Utah. We had to explore ourselves by kayaks and canoes. Nowadays, we have a river company through the Navajo tribe and take people down this section all the time. We found a put-in at mile 10, just outside of Shiprock. It was about 10 bumpy, bad road miles to the river, but provided a good launch area. We used my truck to put in with the boats. We had already dropped off a truck at the Four Corners Bridge. The day was fairly warm for early March, mid-60s, I think. We did the run in under 5 hours. We loaded the boats and gear in the truck and headed back over to pick up my truck. It was getting dark by the time we got there. My ex-wife and my partner pulled out of the small canyon before me. We carry walkie-talkies on the river and in our vehicles. I turned mine on and told them to wait up. My partner replied, "Sure, no problem." And just before he let go of the button, I heard my ex-wife screaming, "What's going on up there?" I shouted through my walkie-talkie, "Your wife sees something up by that old sheep corral. Turn your brights on. I can't see it because I'm trying to get out of here and not wreck this truck." She said, "Look, it's on your right. You'll be coming right up on it." Sure enough, I got right behind them. I saw the back of it as I turned on my headlights. A few swings of its arms and it was out of there. This was not what I expected to see at all. I would put it at about 7 feet tall, skinny, gray in color, arms past the knees, like looking at the back of the Grinch. Head pointy. My ex got a better look at it than I did. She said it looked right at her. Does not much want to talk about it. June 15th, 2002, San Juan County, New Mexico. At approximately 8:30 p.m., I was on my way back from a dinner with my grandfather near Shiprock, New Mexico. While sitting on the passenger side in my mom's truck, I was looking out the window on the state highway near Crystal, New Mexico, before the Bull Canyon turnoff. At that moment, I was feeling calm, bored, and frustrated with trying to calm my younger cousin, who was very hyper. So while I was looking for something to amuse him, I sighted something unusual moving. It was huge. It was as tall as the cedar trees that are around here. I was very scared and shaken when I saw it. I thought, what the heck is that? It looked like a man, but as I was watching it, I noticed it had hair covering its whole body with a mixture of gray, dark brown, and white on its chest. The head and feet, also the hands, were all dark in color, and the legs were dark gray. The face was lighter in color, and when I saw the face, it was turned toward my direction. The forehead was most unusual, and it really stuck out. With no neck, it had a slump in the shoulders, and its arms hung down to its knees. It took large steps, and its arms swung back and forth. The distance from the highway was about 60 yards, and I told my mom to stop. But she was scared, too scared to turn around. My uncles made a cast of what we believed to be the footprint the next morning. Case Files. The Tanner Creek Stalker, 1993. Submitted by Lex Loeb, age 49, of Cascade Locks, Oregon. Incident: summer 1993, Tanner Creek Valley, Oregon. I had an encounter in the summer of 1993. I was running a trail, actually a service road, behind the closed gate at the top of the Tanner Creek area. I was enjoying my run and the solitude when suddenly something began pacing and following me swiftly, deep in the brush below the trail. And it was talking. I was a good trail runner at the time and was running on an open trail. I can't imagine how any person could have been running as fast as I was through the thick brush and on those steep mountainsides. As I ran faster, it ran faster and continued to stalk me. I called out to whatever it was, and it mocked me. I called out, "Who's there?" and got back something that sounded about the same. This terrain is not an echo chamber. I then said, "Hello, hello, hello," and got back, "Hi, ho, ho, ho." I ran the hell out of there much faster than I normally could have to my car and got out of there. That may be the reason the Forest Service shut off access up there. It's probably a half day or whole day hike now since they closed the road. But if you want your own experience, I suggest you try going up there. Fast Moving Sasquatch, submitted by Dusty Domey, age 31, of Seattle, Washington. Sighting: September 1994, Mount Spokane, Washington. A friend and I were bow hunting on Mount Spokane up by the ski lifts. The day was warm and clear. We both saw a creature outlined on the ridge above us, probably 1,000 yards or more away. It was an upright figure, at least a foot or two taller than a tall man, with a fairly wide body. We couldn't make out any features, as the sun was behind it on the ridge, but it caught our eye right away because of how fast it was moving. At first, we thought we'd spooked an elk, but we immediately noticed it was upright and moving on two legs the whole length of the ridge to the tree line, probably 5,000 yards. When I say fast, I mean probably 30 or 40 miles per hour. It was as fast as I've ever seen an elk or deer cut loose. There's no doubt in either one of our minds as to what we saw. It actually kind of ruined our hunt. Needless to say, we haven't hunted Spokane County since. This is a no bull story, and I swear by it. Watched on the River, 1995. Submitted by Melinda May Reynolds, age 32, of Kelso, Washington. Sighting: August 1995, Abernathy Creek, Washington. I've spent a lot of time in the woods hunting in the Great Northwest. In 1995, I wasn't hunting. I was 4 months pregnant. Instead, my boyfriend and I went camping along Abernathy Creek in Cowlitz County. This area is downstream from a fish hatchery, almost to the mouth where the creek dumps into the Columbia River. We had our tent on a flat spot about 10 feet from the river. We had a small campfire and were sitting around talking and enjoying the night when we began to smell something bad. The closest thing I can compare it to is an elk during rut. They have a very strong, musty odor. Suddenly, we heard something in the brush across the river on the opposite bank, only about 8 feet across. We shined our flashlight over and saw nothing. I assumed it was probably a deer going down for a drink. About 20 minutes later, we heard branches breaking and loud crunching. The noise became more intense by the minute, and from experience, I knew it was no deer. I got a very unsettling feeling and again shined the light across the river. There was a lot of thick brush and trees, but animal eyes shine when a light hits them. Suddenly, something caught my eye, and I froze in disbelief. I saw a face looking back at me. It looked like the Bigfoot drawings I'd seen on TV, but this one had dirty white hair, not dark. His arm was stretched above and to the side, his hand up on some tree limbs, as he pushed them aside, almost as if he were holding back a curtain to look through a window. All I could see was from his head to just below the shoulders. Where he stood was above the riverbank on about 6 feet or higher ground than we were, so my guess would be that he was about 7 feet tall. He may have been bending to look through the brush. The hair was longer around the head than the shoulders and arms. Circling the face was all hair, yet it was sparse around the eyes and nose. The hair stood up rather than lying flat, about 4 to 6 inches long, kind of like those lizards with the frills around their heads. His mouth was closed and drawn down. I saw no teeth. The nose seemed ape-like with wide nostrils. I almost swear the eyes shone red, but that might have been fear. He wasn't doing anything but looking at us. We threw sand on the fire, left the tent, and got out of there. Sheer fright is the best way to describe it. My boyfriend didn't see it, but he heard all the noise, and he knew I was good at identifying animals. This was one I couldn't. I've hunted everything from bears to cougars to raccoons, deer, and elk. Never have I seen anything stand upright and look like this did. I don't know if it meant us harm, but it had ample opportunity and didn't act. It just looked. I've heard 2 other people talk about a similar creature in close proximity to this area. I can still see the face. I can still feel the fear. I will never, ever forget it. I'm a God-fearing woman, and that's what I saw. Bigfoot Followed Me Home, 1996. Submitted by MJH, age 49, of Portland, Oregon. Encounter. Summer 1996, Sandy River at Oxbow State Park, Troutdale, Oregon. I was camping with my son on the Sandy River at Oxbow State Park. I've been going there every summer for over 20 years. One morning after breakfast, I took my son for a walk through the woods. He was 4 at the time. We'd only walked about a quarter mile when we came upon a ravine, overgrown with vines and trees. I heard a loud crack and turned to see something very large parting the foliage. It was about 100 feet away in an almost vertical ravine, impossible to climb without cutting through thick, jungle-like growth, about 60 to 80 feet high. At first, I thought it was a bear, a wild boar, or maybe a giant deer. A park ranger later told me there are neither bears nor large game in the area. I froze in fear for nearly 5 seconds. The foliage was being pushed apart loudly and violently, nearly 7 feet across. Then came a smell like a dead animal mixed with cat spray and musk. It was overwhelming. I picked up my stunned son and ran. We went back to the campsite, packed everything, and left. We spent the rest of the day by the river, away from the forest. I was more scared than I've ever been in my life. That night, back at a small cabin I rented in Troutdale, I noticed a horrible smell on the truck, inside and out. I assumed I'd hit a skunk or something. 2 weeks later, I went to the cabin late at night to retrieve a toy train set. That same horrible smell hit me again. I started shaking. I opened the door, ran to my truck, and just as I did, I heard an incredibly loud, shrill scream 3 feet behind the cabin, then a gurgling sound, and another scream. I looked back from about 6 car lengths away, and there it was. A Bigfoot standing right where my truck had been. About 8 feet tall, with matted light brown or tan hair, no neck, and arms that hung almost to its knees. It stood under a light, just watching me. I floored it and didn't stop until I reached downtown Gresham. I don't know if it followed me or lived nearby, but the cabin sits on the same river and backs up to the same land as Oxbow Park, 15 miles away. Months later, when moving out, I joked with the old man who owned the cabin that I'd seen Bigfoot. He just said, "Oh hell, they've been here since my great-granddad worked the old mill upriver. I hope I never see it again." It felt evil, like pure terror. I used to love nature. Now I only camp in a motorhome. No more tents, no more hiking. This is a true story. I take a lie detector test to prove it. A Close Call, 1996, submitted by Frank O'Connor, age 37, of Salem, Oregon. Sighting, late summer 1996, Interstate 5, Siskiyou Summit, Northern California. I travel between California and Oregon several times a year. In the summer of 1996, around midnight, I was driving my '68 Chevy El Camino northbound on I-5 at the Siskiyou Summit. The sky was clear, stars visible. As I rounded a corner and crested a hill, I saw a figure jump the center divider. I thought it was a person and hit the brakes, but it kept moving. Not running, but walking, and stopped almost on the center line. I swerved and stopped, no more than 20 feet from him. Under the headlights, I could see clearly. It was a Bigfoot. He was over 7 feet tall, built like a basketball player and Paul Bunyan combined. Kind of hunched, medium dark brown hair about 3 inches long, unkempt, long arms, dark eyes that blended with the coat, no visible skin. He looked like a human covered in hair. Honestly, like something out of Harry and the Hendersons. Whoever made that character must have seen Bigfoot. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. He seemed as curious about me as I was about him. He looked scared, lost. I wasn't scared, just amazed. Then he walked off a few long strides and disappeared. I had the chance to hit him for science, but I couldn't do it. I'm glad I didn't. He deserves to live in peace. I always believed in Bigfoot. Now I know. I've seen him. He's real.